Welcome to our channel. Whether you're looking to relax, unwind with bedtime stories, or discover unique ways to de-stress, we are dedicated to providing you with the most serene and tranquil experience. Subscribe to our channel and join us in exploring captivating traditional culture and mysterious stories together. In the wilds of Airdrie, on the top of a great mountain, there is a lake called St. Anna's Lake, which, long ago, was the territory of the king of the land of the green water fairies, and he and his daughters lived there. On fine summer afternoons, the king used to go out in a pearl boat when his daughters played with the dainty water fairies in the soft grass. The little fairies hid in the stamens of the flowers and peeped out. Sometimes they ambushed in the petals of the standing gold flowers and bravely attacked the locusts. Sometimes they rode on huge butterflies and hunted down the ugly spiders and snatched up the webs to weave veils for themselves. While the little fairies laughed and played, the aged king of the green water always rested on the trunk of a hollow tree. He would rest all afternoon. His long green beard was covered with mold, his hair was covered with moss, his face was covered with thousands of wrinkles, and his hands were like pieces of rotting wood. But the little fairies, his daughters, were quite different. Their skin was whiter than snow, their eyes bluer than the clear sky, and their long hair draped over their shoulders like a golden satin. They combed their golden hair with combs made of shells, and then put on crowns of flowers made of glazed grass and lilies, and when they sang, all the birds in the forest stopped singing and turned their ears to admire their beautiful songs. One day a few men passed by the lake and were so charmed by the quiet and beauty of the place that they decided to build a church in honor of St. Anna, and a great ceremony was held. And from this time the people of Secure went to St. Anna's church year after year to offer incense. The old caretaker of the church had to ring the bell 3 times a day, which made the king of the green water and his people feel very uneasy and annoyed, for the fairies could not bear the ringing of the bells, and as soon as they heard them they hid themselves in the king's palace deep under the water, where the bells could not reach them. But the good news was that the bells eventually reached the palace of the king of green water. The old king was so angry that he pulled his beard, and the poor fairies cried even more. Their cries reached the ground, and the herdsmen were so afraid to hear them that they didn't dare to graze their cattle in the neighborhood. Once a nearby farmer hired a Romanian shepherd to graze his cattle for him, and he warned the shepherd not to drive the cattle into the reeds by the lake. But the willful boy did not heed his master's advice, and at dusk he built a campfire by the lake and lay himself down by it. Suddenly a strange little man appeared before him. He had a long, moldy beard, wore a coat of green velvet, and a huge golden crown covered his mossy hair. The shepherd knew how to deal with him, and he asked the king of green waters what he had brought him. A sack of gold and a sack of silver. The king of green waters answered as he wrung water from his beard. "With what shall I repay you?" The young man asked again. "Bring me the bell from St. Anna's church." The king said, "Throw it into the heart of the lake, where a red pine tree grows, and 2 leather pockets hang from the pine tree, and the leather pockets contain gold and silver. You will not get that money unless I lead you to it." The young man found it very interesting and promised to fulfill the king's wish. In the middle of the night, after everything had quieted down and the old watchman of the church was asleep, the shepherd stole the bell without any difficulty. The king of the green water was waiting for him by the lake. The king nodded as if he had the emperor's scepter, and his demeanor looked so solemn and majestic. The shepherd followed the king down to the lake, walked to the center of the lake next to the red pine tree. The king pulled off the bell's tongue, threw the bell into the water, and then handed him 2 bags of treasure. The 2 bags were very heavy, and the shepherd was so crushed that he bent almost to the ground at the waist, but at last made his way back to land by the same route with great care. But just as he tried to straighten up and catch his breath, he bent lower and lower, and at last fell to the ground. When he looked into the water, he realized that he had become a bull. The next morning, the farmer was astonished to see a huge black bull among his herd. But what amazed him more was that the bull had a pocket hanging on one side of his neck, one bag full of gold and the other full of silver, and the bull was moaning like a man, with tears in his eyes. As soon as it was discovered that the bell of St. Anna's church had been stolen, the farmer took the money out of the bag, bought a new bell, and hung it up for worship. The old watchman tried to ring the bell, but there was no sound at all, and the bell stopper seemed to be made of rubber. That night, the watchman dreamed that St. Anna, the glorious patron saint of churches, led him to the palace of the king of the green water under the water and showed him the place where the bell was kept. The caretaker told him the details of the dream to the people of the village, and some of the bold young boys of the village ventured to the bottom of the lake to fetch the bells. Many days passed, and not one of them returned, but it turned out that the fairies had killed them in revenge, hiding their bodies among the weeds and pebbles. Many a poor mother lost her son, and many a parent begged their children not to go near Lake St. Anna, but in vain, and in the stillness of the night, the marvelous song of the fairy gate drew the youngsters to the lake. When they saw the fairies resting in the glittering lake, they could not help jumping into the water, and they were never seen coming ashore again. The farmer, who owned the black bull, had 3 sons. He told the 3 brothers to take turns watching the bull every day. One night it was the elder brother's turn to look after it. He went down to the lake, tied the enchanted bull to a tree, and went forward involuntarily, the bull calling sadly after him, but he did not seem to hear him at all, and sat down by the lake. In a little while the moon rose, and the eldest daughter of the king of the green waters appeared on the water. Her features were very beautiful, her cheeks were of a rosy color, her lips were red as coral, and in her golden hair she was adorned with a crown of blue water lily flowers woven into her hair. She wore a gossamer garment of shining silver. The young man could not contain himself at the sight of such a beautiful nymph, and gazed at her with wide-open eyes. The nymph walked towards him, getting closer and closer, and finally almost hearing his heartbeat. "Shepherd boy, beautiful young man," the fairy princess greeted him in a sweet voice. "Come to me and join me down there. My home is in the palace of the Crystal King, which is adorned with rubies and emeralds, and filled with sparkling pearls. The flowers of the gardens also sparkle like jewels. Come to me, marry me, and kiss me." The young man replied, "How can I come to you, sweet nymph? I cannot live in the water. It would be better for you to come to me. I too have a sunny house and a little garden. When the sun rises in the morning, it is more beautiful than all the rubies and emeralds in the world. Come to me, and I will marry you." After hearing him, the fairy swam to the lake and gave him her hand. He tried to pull the fairy up and take her home, but the fairy was much stronger than the man, and she immediately dragged him into the water. The poor teenager screamed miserably and disappeared. The next night, the second was tempted into the water by a second princess in the same way. On the third night, It was the third's turn to watch over the black bull, and his mother tried hard to persuade him not to go to the lake, but all to no avail. "Mother, don't be afraid." He kissed his mother's brown cheek and said, "I will come back safe and sound." He sat down under a maple tree, took out his flute, and played a beautiful tune. The sound of the flute echoed over the waters, and at once the youngest daughter of the King of the Green Waters appeared. She was the most beautiful of the sisters. On her head she wore a crown of flowers woven of acacia. Her eyes were like two blue acacia flowers. Her smiling lips were like tiny rose stamens, and she wore a veil that shone with iridescent splendor. As soon as the lad saw her, he at once ceased blowing and could not help crying out, "Girl of the water, fair fairy, come to me. I love you. I will marry you." The gentle fairy took pity on the feeble lad, and she replied, "Go away, pretty boy of the earth. We cannot be married, and it will do you no good to look at me in this way. I will not go unless you go back with me." The lad refused flatly. "Why do you love me so?" The fairy asked, "Is it because you want the pearl necklace around my neck? I can give it to you. Perhaps you want my golden girdle. Take it, it is yours." With that, he threw the pearl necklace and the gold girdle at his feet. The lad, however, cried out obstinately, "I don't want either your pearl necklace or your gold girdle. I only want you, and I will take you home to my mother, and I will love you as if you were God's little bird." The fairy swam to the lad and held out her hand. The lad dragged her out of the water with all his strength. After a while, she found herself in his arms. When the King of the Green Waters and the other fairies saw the lad pulling the princess outward from the lake, they dragged her by her feet and her long veil and tried to pull her back, but in vain, for she had fallen in love with the shepherd boy. It is said that if a fairy falls in love with a mortal, she loses her magical powers. The boy brought the fairy princess home, and his parents were so happy to see such a beautiful daughter-in-law that they gave her a long tunic of wool. The young couple lived as happily as a pair of turtle doves, and the young man immediately became the most envied man in the neighborhood. The fairy was not a bit different from mortals. Her mother-in-law, however, was a very shrewd old woman who noticed that wherever her daughter-in-law's hand touched, a spot of water was left behind. And in the heat of the summer, when she went beside the flowers in the garden, which raised their heads, she dropped the dew on the stamens with her long, white fingers, and the withered flowers were revived. After a year, the fairy gave birth to a son. She put the newborn baby in a bucket of water, and immediately the child swam around like a fish. Of course, no one knew about this. When the child grew up, people praised him for his extraordinary bravery. He had crossed Lake St. Anna, and if anything fell into the water, he would dive in and retrieve it without effort. After many years had passed, the grandparents died, the shepherds grew old, and the children had grown up. Only the fairy mother remained unchanged, and was not even older than her son, who had grown up to manhood. One year there was a great drought throughout Airdrie, and all the fields and orchards were scorched, and all the wells dried up. But the waters of Lake St. Anna rose so high that they were about to flood the whole village. The fairy mother led her son to the lake, and she told him a secret. At the bottom of the deep lake there's a crystal palace. In the palace lived my father, the king of the land of green water. My sisters and I were born of different mothers. My eldest sister's mother was a cloud, my second sister's mother was water, and my mother was a dewdrop from heaven. My father was a very bad man, and when he was angry with the earth, he confined our mother in the lake, and this was the cause of the terrible drought that took place on the ground. Now, my son, go to the arbor tree and cut a branch, and then jump into the lake and go to my father's crystal palace. If on the way you meet demons who stand in your way, you will strike them with this branch and they will flee in terror. Pass through the yellow water lilies and you'll find my father's palace. The walls of the crystal palace are transparent, and you are able to see the thousands of rooms inside, which are decorated with large adamantine diamonds and green master stones. The beams of the rooms are decorated with rubies, and each doorway is guarded by water dragons with a pair of wings. But you needn't be afraid. Just hit them with an arbor branch and they'll instantly turn to stone. You keep walking through thousands of rooms and step through a green main stone door, and you are in my father's chamber. The floor of that room is made of shells, and the ceiling of pearls, and there you will see many marvelous coral flowers, and adamantine diamonds and fruits of gold, and on the walls hang long water plants hanging down like silk, and little rose-colored frogs hopping over the water plants and singing like nightingales. There you will see the king of the land of green waters, who has a very long green beard, and wears a green velvet tunic and a silver serpent round his waist instead of a girdle. You will also see my sister standing by his side, fanning him with a huge shark's fin. Do not be afraid, they will be astonished to see you, for no mortal has ever been there. My father and my sister will flatter you with all their might, and they will lead you to the treasury and give you much gold, silver, and adamantine diamonds. But remember, you must not accept any of these things. You only want the little bottles that sit on the glass shelves, knowing that they contain the souls of the young boys who were tempted by them to die in the lake. And then ask for a rusty bell, which is hidden in the corner of the treasury. If they won't give you the bell, you threaten to hit that bell with an arbor branch, then they'll give it to you. Then you come back with the bell. But be careful not to let it make a sound until you have left the crystal palace. When you have gone a little way, do your best to ring the bell 3 times with the arbor branch, so that your task is done. The lad obeyed his mother's orders, went to the arborvitae tree, cut down a branch and jumped into the lake. Immediately he found a crowd of water demons surrounding him. Some had 3 heads and flaming eyes, some had flat heads, and others had rolled heads. Among them were huge lizards with human faces, water snakes with horse heads, and many were very small creatures, which bit him, stung him, and sucked his blood. But the son of the fairies was not afraid of these underwater demons. He struck them with the branches of an arbor tree, and they fled at once. The fairies heard the young diver's footsteps and were astonished. The king of the green waters cried out, "Who dares to walk into my kingdom?" So saying, he swung up his king's whip and struck at the lad. Unexpectedly, the young man was faster, and he held the king's whip in place with the branches of an arbor tree. The king was so frightened that he threw away the king's tablet, not knowing what to do. The nymphs knelt down together before the lad and pleaded in desperation, "Great stranger, do not harm us. We will give you gold, diamonds, emeralds, rubies, pearls, and coral. Take as much as you wish. Only have mercy on us and let us live in peace." "I have not come in search of treasure," he answered aloud. "I only want the little bottles that are on the glass shelves in the treasury." So the fairies led him into the treasure house, and he took up the little vials which held the souls of the youngsters, and opened them. At once a cloud of white gas was seen to rise from each vial, and a shout of joy went up to the hour. The fairies embraced the lad, and invited him to dine and drink with them, but he replied, "I would also like to ask you for a bell, the one you stole from the Church of St. Anna's Lake, which I know you have hidden in the Crystal Palace." The fairy shrieked and crowed. The King of Green Water's beard grew twice as long again out of fear. They had only to give him the bell. He wiped the dirt from it and hurried out of the treasury. When he had gone a little way, he swung a branch of arborvitae and struck 3 times hard on the bell. At the first ring, the Crystal Palace collapsed with a bang, and the luminous beams, the golden walls, and the pearly ceilings fell down into a heap of mud and stone. After the second bell, all the goblins at the bottom of the lake disappeared, as if they had never existed at all. After the third bell, 2 slender, silvery white fish appeared, swimming around the ruins of the Crystal Palace, and a large bat perched on the top of the chimney, the King of Green Water and his daughter. As the lad was coming out of the lake toward his home, he saw a very, very old shepherd with a rope around his neck, a rope that used to be tied around the necks of enchanted bulls. This old man was the Romanian shepherd who had stolen the bells of St. Anna's Church and thrown them into the lake. At this, his eyes filled with tears, and he knelt down before the lad, thanking him for freeing him from the evil spell. When the lad returned home, an old woman came up to him and hugged him tightly, kissed him, and told him that she was his mother. "Yes, she really is your mother." The father explains to the stunned lad, "When you were away, she suddenly got a lot older, and I watched her finally become as old as I am. From the time you rang the first bell, she lost her mortal nature, and now she's immortal. Hundreds of years have passed since then, and by now, no one would ever think that Lake St. Anna was once a kingdom of fairies.